Hi everyone, I'm Bob, Nico's assistant. In this video, I'm going to show you some strings libraries combinations that I'm using frequently and how they sound. I've received some requests to make it. So here it is. Since I made this video comparing 53 long strings patches, I've said that, if you are nice I would show you how I layer strings. And you have been really nice. I layer strings directly within Kontakt and I am not using one track per library. I do this for productivity reasons, but it also means that when creating a Kontakt multi, I need to process the libraries a little bit directly within Kontakt. For example, to align sample starts and pre-delays. This is prerequisite knowledge to fully understand this video. If you don't know how this is done, you can have a look at my Kontakt layering video, where I explain how to do just that. I have many strings libraries and there are countless combinations. There are some that I like a lot, but even these would take forever to show. Instead, I will show you 8 combinations that I have used in my latest projects, and I will also show you the processing done to those. I sometimes like to write using Ensemble patches. So I will start by showing you 4 Ensemble combinations, and then I will show you 4 individual section combinations. If you are interested to see how I write using Ensemble patches, I also have a video on this very subject. My template is already pre-mixed. So for each combinations I will show you just that. Each example that you will hear is also mastered, but I haven't touched anything on the premix settings. Let me know in the comments if you want to see how I master my tracks, and maybe I'll do a video on that in the future as well. Lastly, the combinations that I'm showing you here are for long articulations only. At a later time, I will do a video on the short articulations which are quite different. Right. Let's have a look at the first one. This first one uses 2 ensemble patches. I call it Soft Symphonic Ensemble. It is a blend between Spitfire Symphonic strings and Spitfire Albion Neo. Check the patches used, the microphones and the release sample sliders. I wanted something that sounds both delicate and large. I've EQ'd it to make it softer in the high mids and remove the buildups at 300 and 500 Hz. I've added another EQ on top to bring out the highs a bit more and to add some bottom end as well. At the start of the chain, I use a transformer emulation called Soaring. It helps with adding just a bit of analog warmth. Similarly, at the end of the chain, I use a tape emulation from Black Rooster Audio. Just a bit, nothing drastic. I do my gain staging with sets and CS to make sure that the signal going into the analog emulation plugins is not too hot. For more clarity, I use multi-band compression with a Drummer S73 preset. And lastly, the reverb comes from VSS3, which to me is the sound of movies. Here it is. This next one, I call it the Deep Ensemble. It's so big that it is a bit unrealistic, but yet, it sounds very cinematic. I use this on emotional and sad scenes. A combination of Spitfire Masse and musical sampling Soaring strings. There is also a bit of Albion 5 in there, but only for the high notes. Some of the plugins are the same as before, so I won't go over them again. As you can see on the EQ, I've boosted the basses a bit, removed some buildups, and added a high shelf. I've added 2 compressors. One on the strings bus to help glue the patches together, but it doesn't do more than 0.5 dB of peak reduction. The second one is on the mix bus to tighten everything together, the strings with their reverb. Then there is a delay plugin to give the impression of a larger room, and another saturation plugin to enhance the stereo space. Both of these tricks I learned from Joel Dahlia in his mixing online courses. Let's have a listen. This third combination, I call it the intimate ensemble. Not because it is chamber-sized, but because the sound is more focused and closer to us. I use the full strings ensemble from Albion 2 Loegria, which is now discontinued by Spitfire, and the B strings Divisi from Albion Neo. The reverb is the same as before. A tweak large wormhole from VSS3 that I use for the tail. The early reflections are turned off because both libraries are already recorded in a great room. For the EQ, I have opted for my favorite analog emulation. Cutting the low mids a bit and adding some sheen to the high frequencies. I take care of the resonance with Gullfoss. It's easy to overdo things when using this plugin, so you have to be very careful when using it. The compressor is the same brand as before but a different one. I like how it adds subtle warmth to a smaller strings part. I've also changed the mix bus compressor to something a little bit less colored than the SSL. The tape saturation to glue the libraries and the reverb together is from Softtube. Finally, I've increased the stereo space by using the Ozone Imager. This combination uses a little bit less processing than the others. Let's listen to how this sounds. This last ensemble, before we look at individual sections, is my go-to ensemble for writing. I've used it on several projects that I scored. I call it the Lush Ensemble. It features twice the Lush strings from Afflatus. One time the regular patch. And one time with the Consortino option activated. I've turned off the Hull microphone on both because the Hull is taken care of by the Spitfire Symphonic Strings ambient mic. I have already pre-EQ'd the multi within Contact. The sections are so big that there's a lot of frequency build-ups. The other plugins that I use to pre-mix this ensemble are the same as before. Only the reverb is different this time. I use cinematic rooms with the early reflections turned off, but with a massive 5 seconds tail. This is as lush as it gets. Let's now look at the individual sections combinations. Because I've just shown you my Lush ensemble, which is one of my trade secrets, let's see about the one I call Lush sections. It is the same as the Lush ensemble. 2 times Afflatus Lush strings and Spitfire Symphonic strings. The EQ in Contact is the same as before. All the plugins that I used to pre-mix the sections and the strings bus were already shown before, so I won't go over them again. We have first violins B, second violins, violas, cellos and basses. In the Contact window, I am showing you the violas because it's the only section that plays throughout the cue. As you will hear, the main difference that we have compared to the Lush ensemble is that now we have legato transitions. Now comes the simplest combination. the Cinematic Studio sections. This is one that I use often when I need something with heavy vibrato. It is only Cinematic Studio strings layered with Cinematic Studio solo strings. Notice how I boosted the close mic on the solo strings. Each section has a low cut according to its range. The strings bus has a small dip to take care of some build-ups. Because CSS is quite dark out of the box, I also boost 2 dB at 12K. Bass room takes care of my low ends. And another EQ to dip the mids a little bit. All the other plugins we have seen before. Let's listen. In the same way that I did for Cinematic Studio, here I also blend two libraries from the same vendor. In my template, I call this one Spitfire Symphonic sections. A combination of symphonic strings and chamber strings. The chamber strings are here to provide some definition like a close microphone would to the large symphonic sections. Aside from the regular plugins that we've already seen, I use a SSL console emulation to sculpt the tone a little bit. Not much, just a bit. Dipping a bit in the low ends. Boosting the low mids and adding a high shelf. Here it goes. Lastly, this is the intimate sections from my template. All the sections use two of my favorite strings libraries. Afflatus and 8dio century strings. But the basses use Spitfire chamber strings instead of century strings to give them that round low end. Again, the premix is really straightforward and I won't go over it. Just note that I've used an EQ to dip the mids on the strings bus. Let's listen. Well, that's it. Now stop watching videos and go write some great music.